Good morning, everybody. Thank you for sticking around. Sunday morning, and many of us have to travel quite a ways, so I won't keep you very long. To start, Jim, I want to thank you for inviting me to this. You did a great job, and I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude. Thank you very much. And Doug, I'm going to shock the hell out of you. You convinced me. It's a well-presented case. I may even be in a position to help you a little bit on this, too. I'm just going to put out a couple of issues, food for thought, based on Doug's case, and I want to work on this a little bit myself. I do have the clearest possible copies of the Alkins 5 photograph, and I'll see if I can make something available to you that's clearer than is even in the book. I also would like to spend a little bit of time studying Alkins 6, which does show the damage to the windshield. I want to check it for position, height, etc. with what you've found. An observation, I didn't have a pen and paper, so I couldn't write the stuff down, and I apologize to you for that. I should have, and I didn't. One thing that comes to mind, and has been a considerable problem for some time, is the statements made by Gordon Arnold. I'm sure you're all aware of Gordon. If you're not, Gordon was standing, or says he was standing, on the grassy knoll. At the time of the headshot, he's still standing there if the analysis, especially done by Jack, is correct. He's still standing there at the time of the headshot and then dives for the ground. Question is, if the throat shot and the headshot came from the same position, why didn't Gordon dive for the ground after the throat shot was fired? That's always been problematic. If in fact your firing point is correct, and I'm not as convinced of as I am of the fact that the shot came from the front. I think your witness is extremely convincing. It would explain why Gordon didn't hear that first shot, or at least did not respond the same way, and why he was still standing there when the headshot was fired from the knoll. This, I think, is quite positive. I have an advantage that perhaps none of you have had in this particular case. I've actually seen the windshield that's in the archives. I've touched it. I've worked with it when I was with the House Assassinations Committee. It's in a pine crate. It's extremely convincing to see this. It's an artifact of the assassination that just tends to overwhelm you. The spider, what I call the spider leg crack that was there and photographed in the picture. And by the way, Gary did this the other day, you did it too. I wrote high treason. It just drives me crazy to hear.
You're talking about the last.
Yeah, I know, but it's still my book.
That's true.
Anyway, I just want to mention that.
That's true.
Just for the record.
And actually, for the record, I'd rather give Bob credit than Harry.
The point of the matter is that the photograph of the windshield, again, is extremely convincing. Without what you've developed, the idea of a challenge of that doesn't really make much sense. But in light of that, I can see why they would do that. I've made it very clear, I think, this weekend and in the past, that I do not believe the Zapruder film was altered. I do know, beyond any question, that the autopsy photographs were. I think that the only alteration that is provable in the Zapruder film is the two splices made by Life magazine, the first which they deny exists, but it certainly is there, and the second one which they do admit, and Josiah Thompson first publicized in 1966, 1967 in 6 Seconds in Dallas. As far as alteration of the president's body goes, I believe it's unquestionable that something was done to the president's throat. I interviewed Dr. Perry in 1978, and I showed him the autopsy photographs, which he had never seen before. And he took a look at the throat wound in the photographs, and he stood up at his desk, and he was just shocked. He was silent for a moment, then he said, "I didn't do that." He said, "That's a butcher job." He said, "I didn't do that." And then he relived the entire tracheotomy. He stood up and he had what was supposed to be a scalpel in his hand, and he showed doing the incision, and said it was only about a little over an inch long. He says, he just went on and on about why that couldn't have been what he had done. And so I know, and I think we all know, although somebody yesterday said everything's been altered. Well, I don't think everything's been altered, but I think certain things have been. And I think that what you have done is presented a very strong case, and I thank you for it, to show that something has been done, that they did hide the fact of a shot from the front. One question I would have, or two questions I would have, just again as food for thought, if there is a possibility that Bill Greer or Roy Kellerman or both had prior knowledge of this, and if they knew the shot was going to be fired from the front, they would be in the line of fire. Number two, the idea of planning to fire through the windshield would be risky, because what would happen if, in fact, the glass shattered? Which, if anyone has ever seen what happens if you throw a rock against a windshield, it has the little square patches on safety glass that just spread all through the whole thing, and it could just fall down. The safety glass is bonded. You have one piece of glass, and then you have an adhesive layer in between, another one on the other side. And for a bullet to go straight through, it has to hit both of those pieces of glass and go through the adhesive. It's not impossible that it would happen the way it would. Maybe it was known and tested. Maybe that's what you would expect to see. I don't know. The House committee, I can tell you, never considered the possibility of a switch of the windshield. What they did do, and what never made the report, and what you might find interesting, is the damage which you saw a few moments ago to the chrome above the windshield. They actually took a Carcano-sized bullet and they fitted it in to that, just to satisfy themselves whether or not it did come from a bullet. In fact, it did. And they were convinced of that, but they never wrote it in the report. So I'm not going to hold you guys up very much longer. So, you know, we have another presentation to go, do we not? Yes. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you all for staying. And Jim, once again, thank you for this. I wish there would be more regional meetings. I wish that people who normally cannot travel to Dallas or Washington would get a chance to see this nationwide. The information is important. The study is important. And I've said many times through the years, may the truth be known soon. Soon is already over, guys. It's over. Let's face it. It's going to be the year 2000 in several months. This will then be the Lincoln assassination of the 21st century. It will really be ancient history. And it's up to us to keep the issues alive. If we don't do it, nobody else will. And I think one way to do it, it was mentioned last night, present your evidence, make it known, figure out how to broadcast it. Well, you have a voice, folks. You have a mind. You guys know it. If you didn't believe in this, you wouldn't be here. If you weren't interested, you wouldn't be here. You have friends, you have relatives. They're not here. They'll never come to these. But you can bring the subject to them. It's a good food for discussion. Parties, family get-togethers, meetings, whatever. It's a fascinating subject, and virtually everyone's interested in it. I meet maybe 2,000 to 3,000 people a week, every week in Dealey Plaza, Saturdays and Sundays. And they're there for a reason. They're there because they care. It's Mecca for them for some reason. They just had to go there. If they were in Dallas for something else, even if they have no interest in the case, that's the place they're going to go. The interest is there, and it's up to all of us to keep the issue alive. And I thank you all for coming.
Before we take questions, I'd just like to make a comment in relation to Robert's suggestion of taking the case to them. We're a visual medium. There's several excellent videos out, including one by Robert, entitled Jfk the Case for Conspiracy. There's another video, a 4.5-hour survey of the case divided into 7 parts that I prepared in 1994 that includes the medical discoveries by David Mantik, the discovery about the diagrams and photograph by Robert B. Livingston, and the rest of the state of the art as of 1994, which even includes discussion of 15 indications of Secret Service complicity in the assassination and evidence that the Zapruder film has been altered. Now, Andy has about a dozen of those. The thought I have is this: if you pick up a copy of that and mail it to friends or relatives in cities, ask them to put it on your community access television channel, because by God, they'll play it on those community access television channels, and with considerable effect. A former student of mine, for example, who's doing graduate work at the University of Michigan, had this video that I prepared in '94 put on their local community access channel, came back about a year later to talk, thinking maybe it was time to put it on again, and when they discovered who it was, a general manager came out, started shaking his hand and telling him how they'd had more requests for this video, which they'd already played 8 times since he had brought in. And I'm just telling you, this is a simple way to reach out to the community and get this information out there and stimulate interest, so let me encourage you to do it. It's a modest investment that potentially might have a great return. Let me now open the floor to questions for Doug Weldon. Yes?
I'll talk here. Okay, and I'd like to respond to Bob's questions too, but go ahead.
And this is, I guess, in general. Why the first shots fired from the front if they're trying to frame Oswald from the back?
My feeling is that the framing of Oswald was a plan that developed in the aftermath of the assassination. They improvised. That's why things are so sloppy. I don't think it was dependent on the beginning. The opportunity presented itself to frame Oswald with a lot of things that happened, and that's why it wasn't so well conceived, and that's why secrets weren't kept.
And if a bullet goes through a windshield and ends up in a body, would there be glass particles in the wound? And would that be a reason why the tracheotomy was all part of it?
I don't think that explains the tracheotomy, but certainly, again, I'm not a medical expert, but I would think that there would be some glass fragments that would carry into the throat if it would be driven through the windshield. Let me just respond to Bob's real quick. As far as the Greer, I'm not sure that Greer had to know that there, I don't know who knew what, that there was going to be a shot coming through the windshield. Greer, if he was involved, might have just been told to, slow down. And matter of fact, I would not, if I was planning that, I would never let Greer know that, yeah, there's going to be a shot coming right past your head. Somebody's going to be shooting at the president. And the other question kind of dovetails into his. If the glass ended up shattering, I would guess that they would have done a lot of tests. But if it did, the question is, so what? Because I think the framing of an Oswald, everything that transpired, a lot of it was improvised after the assassination. So I don't think it's that critical. It just gave them an opportunity to do some things the way that things worked out. Okay.
Yes.
I don't know why John Armstrong has run off with extensive notes.
No, he's still up here.
Okay, I'm going to only do one. On your logbook, a log sheet,
Yes.
the first 5 names they look as if they were all signed in by the same person.
Right.
Actually, shows in Secret Service as a number of also.
Right.
The second name is Cortland Cunningham.
Right.
Cortland is not
He's
Secret Service.
FBI. He's one of the people that examined.
Ballistics expert. He's incorrectly given credit for having done the Jfk Conway ballistics examination. He did the Tippett ballistics.
I'm glad you noted that, because he was one of the people that was one of the FBI agents that examined the night of the assassination.
That's just a mistake to have listed him with the Secret Service people?
I don't know why they did. I mean, it is strange. I mean, I have no explanation. Yes. Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Second name down.
Based upon your research, is it fair to say that in the design of that $200,000 vehicle, probably $1 million car today, there wasn't much planning or attention to the idea of acceleration and ultimately responding to an emergency? Greer says that he was frozen in trying to get that, what you, I think, were describing as a cruise control into the overdrive so he could take off.
If that cruise control existed, literally it would have been overridden by him hitting the brake. It would be like a cruise control. They were supposed to run at a parade speed. Again, I'm very reticent because Willard Hess has been very candid and open with me, and he's kind of retracted, and I'm interested to see what he sent me. Roy Schaefer showed me an article last night which seems to suggest, he gave me a schematic and showed me something which seems to suggest that that throttle was there. The car had no acceleration problems. And that is clearly seen in Bob's films. When that car takes off, it takes off. So I don't see it having an acceleration problem at all.
The construction of the vehicle, by the way, cost approximately $1 million. We have the work order and all that, so actually the government was paying for it about $1 million to
Well, for
destroy the scene of the crime.
right, for Johnson.
Bill's presence on the back of the limo on Main Street is news to me. Do you know, is that alluded to at all in the Warren Commission?
I don't remember. Yeah, the innocent explanation is I don't think that the Secret Service was told by Kennedy to stay off his vehicle. And
Why would he withdraw between Main and Elm as well?
well, they are taking, you know, to be honest, they are taking a turn there, and the cars are close together. I don't know. Maybe just decided to hop a ride. But
It happened 2 or 3 times during the motorcade. This was not the only incident.
Right.
Flint Hill Road on the back.
That particular photograph was taken in the turn from Farmwood Street on the Main.
right,
On it then, he was on 235.
right.
On Lemon Avenue, he was running beside the Farmwood Street at the time. For the most part, he didn't stay up there. He went there for a very short period of time.
Unless you want to listen to my presentation for 12 hours, I've got some very interesting things that happen on Lemon Avenue too.
Right.
Just an observation, question, answer. Okay, if the bullet which I believe hit the windshield, it made a heck of a lot of noise. By the way, I was in the car when that happened. You know when that hits the windshield, that's when I acknowledge it. Why did Greer take off then? He waited 6 seconds later. I think that's very personal.
There are many indications that William Greer was a crucial figure in the assassination. He was the only person who could save Jack Kennedy's life once he turned into a heated closet. Rick?
It would just seem to me, maybe this is just my logic, that if I'm driving down if I'm driving down the street and something hits my windshield, whether it's a bullet or a stone or anything else, the first thing I'm going to do is hit the brake and reacting to it, not accelerate. It seemed to me if somebody at that point in time on Elm Street wanted to slow the car down, perhaps they let another volley of shots come into the limousine. The best thing to do is to shoot the front of the car. And also in the Mormon picture, it seems to me that Kellerman at that point in time has something in front of his face, like a notebook or something, perhaps reacting to the glass.
Well, he was supposedly talking into one of the phones, Kellerman, is a radio phone. The car was equipped with that. You know, I don't know how you'd react, but the key is that the car was going slow before then, at the time of the throat shot.
About 60 feet to react. I mean, I think they dropped right away. I think that was fine.
Right.
Well, and the key is that they did not react, and if they did not react, it can only be because they expected something like that to happen and they were prepared for it, and they did not slow the limousine or give any indication that they were aware it had even happened. Yes?
First of all, wasn't Clint Hill Jackie's secretary?
Yes.
Why he's running back and forth?
He was invited at the last minute.
Yeah.
He wasn't intended to be a part of the detail. It was only because he was her personal bodyguard that they could not override her request.
Kellerman was not supposed to be there. Kilduff was not supposed to be there. The changes that took place that day are amazing if you examine them.
That wasn't my question. In your examination of this with the Ford Motor Company, I know this is far-fetched, but any correlation between Bach and McNamara, hired by Kennedy, head of Ford Motor Company, yada, yada, yada.
I don't see anything. Right, I don't see any connection there. Again, I tend to be conservative. I tend not to find conspiracies under every rock. I tend to try to examine the evidence pretty critically. And when I make a statement like I do, I'm pretty confident.
Yes.
At the moment of the assassination,
Louder, please.
At the moment of the assassination, there were 2 lines of traffic which were intervening. They were also moving over the traffic that was blocked on one side.
Right.
Implications of that wall or other trajectories which you propose?
It would have no effect.
The storm drain,
No, you're up above. It would have no effect at all.
Yeah, it's very important to understand on both sides of this triple overpass, there's a storm drain, but it's elevated well above the ground, and a man could stand upright in the storm drain and look through a slot, okay? It's very much like in a castle, where you have these slots where archers or whatever, and it's remarkable in its elevation. The word storm drain does not convey the physical properties.
The top of Elm Street is different, but then again, the trajectory has nothing to do with the top of the street on the other side. By the time where the shooter is, you're well above it.
And it's also not to be confounded with actual drains at curb level, which have sometimes been suspected as having been shooting locations as well. Yeah.
True.
When Brazil did that drain after we did it on the, you might have mentioned, sir, which storm drains?
Jack Brazil studies everything that I've seen was always on the north storm drain, the opposite side. Bob would probably know this.
On the road level or above?
No, it's above. It's the same. It's symmetrical.
The one that Jack Brazil was talking about is actually the same one that was used in the X-Files and
Right.
Virginia Part 6 on the north sidewalk of Elm Street.
How about the train?
Well, Jack Brazil is in the storm drain on the top of the underpass there. Right. He's doing both. He's doing both.
The train that apparently was going by, one of the policemen commented on the noise level that he couldn't hear it because of the train.
Well, that certainly would have helped.
Yeah. Have you considered the possibility there might have been a shooter in the train?
No.
What's that? Yes, apparently there was.
I don't know, but no, I think that would be just impossible.
Up in the back.
There are some unique precedent for some wanting to go there to make the I guess. You refer to things that have changed, the storm drain being sealed over. Now, again, you're saying the north side is essentially a mirror image now?
Oh, it always was a mirror image.
Okay, so if I go there...
You can see what it was like because the north drain is still open and visible. They didn't change it at all.
Okay, and the freeway sign is down. Are there any other physical changes?
Well, Roy mentioned the lamp post.
Lampposts have been put in, and some of them have been moved. I understand. Is Jack here? Having some of those. Where is Jack?
Well, Bob's going to know as well as anybody too.
Let's call on Bob Groden, who had a question.
There have been layers added to the street that changed the sewer drain that was on Elm Street a little bit.
Very quickly, whoever was mentioning the idea of the train, the Bell film was taken as the president's car went underneath the underpass, and it clearly shows the top of the overpass. There absolutely was no train even on it, never mind even moving. That was a rumor. As far as rebuilding in the plaza goes, it's very much the same now as it was then, except that the street lamps that were on the sidewalk then have been moved back into the grass because people kept running into it, including a police officer at one time. They were driving up onto the sidewalk. And the ones on the south curb were never there at all. They've been added since. The construction on the George Allen Courthouse building, which was under construction at the time of the assassination, is now finished. It's done. And the Stemmons Freeway sign, of course, is gone, and the later one, the Arl Thornton Freeway sign, has been changed. It's different now, but the location is the same.
And the Hertz sign is off the roof.
The Hertz sign is off the roof, of course. The Daltex fire escape is gone now, which was there at the time. The road has been paved over several times since then. Although one thing that's rather interesting is that the yellow paint stripes that were on the south curb of Elm Street, although very, very faded and almost completely gone, that original paint is still there. Very little of it, but some of it is still there. The stockade fence itself is in the same position it always was, but it's been rebuilt about 7 times, and souvenir hunters just keep attacking it all the time. But none of the pickets that are there now are legitimate original ones, too. Except for that, and the fact, of course, that the Reunion Tower and the hotel are there now, which weren't there before. It's still very much the same. There was a cement factory on the south side of Industrial at the time, which is now gone and has been replaced by a new jail, which is there. They have just done renovation of the old courthouse, which was built in 1892, one of the oldest standing structures in Dallas. It has just been renovated. It's now a visitor center as well. The irony of this, you'll find this kind of interesting, though, except for the Dow Tex building, every building in Dealey Plaza is a government building. Either the county or the county records building, the county administration building, the county owns the old courthouse, the post office annex. They're all government buildings except for Dow Tex.
There was a big move to take down the depository, and it really took some political fighting to keep it up. But after the assassination, they wanted to remove the depository. And I can't remember the name of the city councilman who waged a successful fight to keep it.
In 1972, somebody torched the school book depository. I have that, and then it was unsuccessful. They really tried to burn it down.
It's a pretty good article on that by William Weston in the fourth decade of the history of the building.
Okay. Yes. And an oilman named Bird, who has been the intermittent owner. Please join me in thanking Doug Weldon, Robert Groden, Roy Schaefer for a wonderful presentation. At this juncture, I want to invite Charles Drago to come forward and Deborah Conway subsequently to address issues about what can be done with regard to promoting understanding of what we know about the death of JFK. Charles.
What I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon, I hope, will make you first angry and then hopeful. About a month and a half ago or so, and I'm going to use this as an illustration, I had the dubious distinction of co-hosting a conference, a JFK conference in Providence, Rhode Island. The co-host is a professor of atmospheric chemistry at the University of Rhode Island, which I'll refer to as URI, and a champion of the lone nut belief system. The conference is important for two reasons. It focuses our attention on a question: how, in 36 years after the event, can we still be engaged in the conspiracy, no conspiracy debate? And it also illustrates how we are engaged with an active and sinister enemy whose intention is not only to continue the cover-up, but to perpetuate those systems which took John Kennedy's life. It reveals the latest strategies in their war against the truth and against this country. And I'll illustrate specifically how that happens. I want to give you a brief but distressing view of the quality of the thought, the arrogance, the sheer power of these people, by giving you an idea of some of the ideas that were presented at this so-called conference. Because unless you've spoken to some of these people, you won't get any real feeling of just how distanced from reality, just how absurd and how dangerous their positions are. I'm reading from an abstract from a faculty member, a tenured faculty member of the psychology department of Hobart and William Smith Colleges, who presented a paper at this so-called conference. His arrogance is reflected in its title. He titled his paper, "To Bury JFK." Now, as I read this paragraph from his abstract, I want you to keep in mind the individuals who presented to you Friday and yesterday and today. Keep in mind the distinguished nature of their accomplishments. Keep in mind their motivations. Keep in mind the quality of their presentations. Here's what this professor of psychology would have us believe of them and us all. Part of his psychological analysis, and I'm quoting, will be the claim that the conspiracy community, for reasons derived from the conspiracy voice, is psychologically and cognitively impaired. And more importantly, that impairment is typical for the epistemology of popular culture in America. Other revisionist history conspiracies, like the recovery from repressed memory and the alien abduction movements, will be analyzed and offered as kindred exemplars of the same type of impairment. End quote. So I would like to urge all of us here to contact our nearest clinics and to seek help now before it's too late. It would be funny, but this character presents it honestly, openly, directly, boldly. He reveals that the targets of this operation are academics and students, and ultimately history. Academics are being targeted so as to give those who would otherwise be ignorant of this event a foundation to defend the lone gunman theory, a foundation based in pseudoscience. It is clear. I watched the chairman of the political science department at the University of Rhode Island, in whose department this course is being taught by a professor of atmospheric chemistry, simply be enthralled by the nonsense, to accept it, to see it as being supported by unassailable scientific proof. It was startling, it was terrifying, and it's going to be happening more and more. I want to talk about the students who are targets, not just at this university. The students who are truly the victims of an intellectual molestation. Students who, in the defense of their professor when he was hoisted on his own petard any number of times, whose defense of this guy is most closely akin to some sort of Helsinki syndrome. They are intellectual and emotional hostages of this authority figure, and yet they're the first to defend him, and yet something within them is reacting against what he's telling them. Time after time they would say, well, I believe in conspiracy, but I've never seen any proof for it. I've never seen any proof for it. What does this tell us about the even-handedness of the course? One of the fallback positions of this professor is that, well, regardless of how my students come down on the conspiracy, no conspiracy question, at least I will have instilled in them cognitive thinking, critical thinking skills, which will serve them well through the remainder of their academic and professional careers. Well, the lie was put to that by the students themselves when they delivered their papers. I'll give you two quick examples. One of the students got up to defend the single bullet theory, and he made the following statement. I paraphrase. He said, studies have been done to show that emergency room physicians are incorrect in their initial diagnoses 70% of the time. So we can dismiss the observations of the emergency room technicians at Parkland. Well, if this young man was truly applying critical thinking skills, he would have understood, he would have at least taken into account the fact that Parkland Hospital is one of the premier emergency medical centers in the world, that it is constantly being inundated with gunshot wound victims, and that the only measure of the accuracy of emergency room physicians' ability to diagnose wounds would be an analysis of those physicians' track records who attended John Kennedy that day. There were other examples. A young woman who was a psychology major presented a rehash of Renatus Hartog's evaluation of Lee Oswald. Essentially, he was predisposed to violence and perfectly capable of killing the president. Her critical thinking skills were not sufficiently developed so as to have her investigate the manner in which Hartog's testimony to the Warren Commission is shown to have been close to, if not over the line of perjury. She didn't think to look at that, didn't mention it, didn't know anything about it. Still on? Yeah. Point is, if the object of the class was to instill critical thinking skills, these papers get Fs. If the object of the class is to recruit young lone nut soldiers, then the papers get an A. 7 minutes. Okay. When I began dealing with this fellow in this conference, I called him, and his ilk, flat earthers. Members of the Institute for Creative Anachronism, people who were making an outrageous claim. But I came to realize that that was too benign, too cute a description. What we have going on out there is the equivalent of Holocaust denial. And what we have in this pseudoscience that they're bringing to the table is the equivalent of the old Institute for Historical Research, where they had people going into crematoria and the camps and chipping away at the mortar and saying, well, we've run tests and we've discovered no traces of cyanide gas in the mortar, therefore the Holocaust didn't happen. These simple-minded, designed with intellectual dishonesty approaches to the study of this case are going to become more and more prevalent, I submit to you. And so our responsibility to get out there and use what we know is heightened. Because the war is ongoing. The enemy is there. I want to make it quick. Okay. We have to ask ourselves a question. I've asked it in Dallas and to other groups, and I've yet to hear an answer. And I don't expect to get one today, but it's the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves. What do we want? What should all of this result in that would make us happy, and if not go home, then at least stand down into a vigilant or a guard mode? Everyone here has to think about that question and come up with an answer. And we have to come to some consensus on it because we cannot plan a route unless we have a destination in mind. And I have yet to hear from in any meaningful way, representative of the majority of our viewpoints, where we want to go. We have to answer that question. We have to answer the question, what are we prepared to do? Yesterday I used the term war often. I used the term propaganda often, and a few people have said that they were uncomfortable with those terms. Well, I'm reminded of Gandhi's dilemma when asked if his nonviolent approach to social change would have worked if instead of having his country occupied by the British, they had been occupied by Hitler and his troops. And Gandhi had no ready answer, although he did seem to imply that his methodology would have been slightly altered. In the past, I've argued for us to assume the methods and tactics and weapons of the enemy in order to effectively combat and win. And yet I'm as troubled by that as anyone here. I don't want to sell my soul to the devil to beat the devil. That trick never works. And yet, as the years go by and the enemy becomes ever more subtle and no less dangerous and no less intent upon winning this war, we have to ask ourselves, who are we? What do we want? And what are we prepared to do to get what we want? In the next year, at the outside, we have to find ways to overcome the personal differences we have with each other, the ideological differences, the serious, honest objections we have to nuances in each other's work, and even more than nuances. We have to find a way to reach consensus to overcome the internecine struggles that have factionalized us, weakened us. And certainly the enemy has had a great deal to do with that. Our communities have been penetrated, have been marginalized, have been demonized. But it does no good to point the finger out there and cry into our beers and say, my God, they're so strong, they're beating us. We must heal ourselves first. Because unless we're prepared to recognize our failures as well as celebrate our successes, we are getting nowhere. I don't know how it's going to happen. I'm not wise. I'm often foolish, but I know that unless we can do it, we fail. So let that be our charge as we leave here today. Not just to continue to preach to the choir, not to be content with the warmth of our reception and the good fellowship that we experience in these conferences. Those of us who wish to rise to positions of leadership, those of us who are committed to this not as a hobby, but as literally to a life and death struggle, had best come together. If our personal viewpoints are not accepted in the consensus or only partially accepted into the consensus, and we can live morally and intellectually with the consensus, then we've got to do everything we can to put our egos aside, salute sharply, and do what has to be done. I'm not wise enough to know the structure of what this will be. I'm not bold enough to even suggest basic ideas. So that is our challenge, and that is our mission. And I'd say in closing that as the next century turns, I don't think this is going to become the Lincoln assassination, but for the wrong reason. It won't become the Lincoln assassination because it won't fade or lose its emotional resonance. It won't become the Lincoln assassination because it's going to happen again. Perhaps not in the form of a presidential assassination, but this system will radically correct itself again when a John F. Kennedy-like threat to it rises. It'll happen in our lifetimes, and we'll make the connection, we'll make the comparison, and it won't go away. What we want to do is make it go away for the right reason, because we will have used our knowledge to change the systems that made this thing happen and to ensure that it won't happen again. I hope and pray that that's what we have the courage and the vision to do. And let me echo everyone else here by saying thank you for having the courage and expending your resources of time and money and emotion to come here, and I hope join together. Thank you.
Our second speaker is Deborah Conway. Yeah.